I'm Natalie, one of the co-founders of Talent Collective. Thanks for joining us today. We'll go ahead and officially kick off in about 2 minutes. I like to wait till 5 after. But in the meantime, if you're so inclined, pop your LinkedIn profile, maybe the city that you're clicking in from in the chat. We can just get to know each other a little bit, and then we'll get started. I guess I could start with mine. I'm gonna put mine in there. I'm Natalie, here you go. And I'm from the Bay Area. But today I'm actually in Carmel by the sea. It is very gorgeous today, very cold, but beautiful. Dallas, awesome. Megan, we have a Dallas chapter coming.
That's incredible.
Soon. They're doing the planning. So very soon. Raquel, you too? Or I heard somebody pop off. Okay. New York, Chicago. Hello, ladies. Let's see, who do we have? Another New York, San Diego. Seattle. Oh, yeah, Ashley. Ashley, you're in Seattle? Have you met Carrie, our chapter lead?
I don't think so.
Carrie Beeks? Okay, I'll have to introduce you. Boston, Melissa. Nice to meet you. Actually, Melissa, remind me if I don't send it to you after this. We have a leaders dinner in Boston, March 3rd or 4th. So we'd love to extend you the invite. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, Jeff too. Cool, okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is a pretty full room. Again, for those just joining, I'm Natalie, one of the co-founders of Talent Collective. We are a global community for women specifically, or those who identify in talent acquisition. So our members and community members are all TA practitioners or people ops practitioners, as long as you're owning the TA function. And reason for that is we like to really geek out and get like really in the weeds TA and recruiting topics. So we welcome TA women in TA leadership, agency founders, corporate recruiters, agency recruiters, rec ops specialists, etc. So we are about 600 members strong now. We just launched our 14th chapter. And if you have any questions about the community, just ping me later. But we're excited to be here today co-hosting this session with Unicorn Talent. I will let everybody formally introduce themselves, but I am here with my co-moderator, Tyler from Unicorn Talent, and we are going to be moderating a session on headcount planning, kind of best practices for 2025. So some of the things that our speakers will chat through is kind of insights into, how to leverage historical data and goals and survey insights, how to consider external influences when you're building your strategy, how to maybe adjust your strategy or build it if you're just beginning or if you don't already have a strategy to adjust, and then getting executive buy-in. So we are very excited to welcome our 3 speakers today. But first, I'll let Tyler introduce herself, and then maybe you can popcorn to our speakers to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Sounds good. I'm Tyler. By day, I work at Headcount 365. We are a headcount planning software. I'm a former people and talent leader myself. I love people ops stuff. I fully geek out on it. So that's what I get to do all day long, which is fabulous. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. It's snowy here. Being from Texas, this is very weird to me. So I love seeing the Austin folks in the chat. yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'll kick it to Jeff, one of our awesome panelists here.
Thank you, Tyler. And thank you all for having me. My name is Jeff. I manage people operations at CarGurus currently. I've spent my entire career in the talent acquisition space. I expanded within the last couple of years to people operations, but thankfully still have the opportunity to own our recruiting operations space, which is near and dear to my heart. So looking forward to getting to talk about that today.
Cool. Rachel, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure thing. I'm Rachel Gulley, head of recruiting operations at FanDuel. I live in Los Angeles and recently relocated from New York, and I was at the launch event for Talent Collective in New York, which was awesome. So happy to be here. But I am coming to you today from Atlanta, so I guess I'm just all over the place. My scope is mostly like people processes technology at FanDuel, and I've spent the better part of the last 10 years in rec ops. But more recently, I've been leaning into like AI and automation. So really excited to talk about that today and hear from others as well.
Cool. Ashley.
Yeah, I'm Ashley. I'm coming from Carta. I lead talent strategy and operations here. I am coming to you from Seattle, which is also where I live. So I'm not traveled today. Yeah, and the scope of what I do is pretty similar, I think, to what Rachel and what Jeff is touching on around talent specific systems and processes. And we own capacity planning and headcount management at Carta as well. So I'm excited to talk to you all about that and hear from our other panelists as well.
Thanks, guys. So we're in for a technical conversation, which is fun. We're going to be in the weeds today. If you have any questions that pop up as we're going through this discussion, please just drop them in the chat. Natalie is going to be monitoring at the end. We'll save about 10 minutes for Q&A and select a few of those questions to throw our panelists' way. But to kick us off, let's start with the first of those four things, which is the talent planning inputs. So for the sake of this conversation, let's assume we have our talent plan, right? It is built, we know what we're hiring, but now we have to actually build the recruiting team and build our strategy around executing on this plan. So my first question is going to be to Mr. Jeff over here. So I want to know, how do you balance historical data with current and future goals when you're forecasting for this hiring plan?
Thank you, Tyler. I think what we'll talk a lot about today is recruiting capacity planning being both a science and an art, right? And I think the question that you teed up is a great place to start there, because I think there is a balance between historical data and current and future goals, and that requires a structured yet adaptable approach, and one that accounts for past performance, current conditions, and workforce needs. So starting with historical data, it's really important that you use that historical data to provide a benchmark for understanding past trends, right? Identifying patterns, setting realistic expectations, and helps you answer the question, how fast do we hire? How many hires do we have per recruiter? And where do we see bottlenecks? So some of the key data points I like to think of there is starting with velocity, right? What's our time to fill? What's our time and stage metrics? Help assess our efficiency and help ultimately predict delays. Looking at recruiter productivity, like I said, how many hires per recruiter per quarter? How does productivity vary based on role type or seniority or department? And then a few other things like offer acceptance rate and seasonality trends. And then where it gets fun is starting to layer in some of those current market conditions and business priorities. So you have your foundation with your historical data, and the reality is it has to be contextualized with the real-time market dynamics and strategic shifts of your business. So asking what's different now and what's changing. So some considerations you can make there is company growth plans. Are you expanding into new markets, launching new products, leaning into mergers and acquisitions? Looking at economic trends, is the market in a growth phase or a slowdown? Because ultimately those economic factors shape talent availability and hiring velocity. Are key roles getting harder to fill? Are compensation benchmarks shifting due to market pressures? And also taking a look at, if we think about looking at historical data, and something that I think Rachel mentioned, how has your process become more efficient? How have investments in AI and automation made recruiters more productive? Those are all really important things to ask about what's happening right now, and then being more forward-looking, thinking about how do you incorporate future headcount demand and workforce planning projections. So I think everybody knows forecasting isn't just about filling jobs today, it's about aligning capacity with long-term business goals. So really some of those inputs are, what is the planned headcount growth? What's already approved in the plan? How many net news are expected? What type of attrition are you expecting? What percentage of backfills have been required in the past based on turnover trends? What are some of the emerging skill gaps? What new roles will be critical for your business for innovation and competitive advantage? And then even shifts in future workforce trends. Are you seeing increased demand for contingent workers and remote talent in new global hiring markets? I think those are sort of your three primary inputs and things to think about. But I think what I wanted to make sure I mentioned here that I've always found really important is that you need to establish a continuous feedback loop, right? Recruiting capacity planning isn't static. It should be a living process that evolves over time based on business needs and real-time data. So having those monthly check-ins with finance and business partners and business leaders to reassess hiring plans, having those quarterly retrospectives to compare what actual hiring performance was against forecasted to help refine future predictions, and then ultimately using tools, whether it's your ATS or a BI tool layer on top, to continuously track recruiter workloads, pipeline health, hiring trends, so that you're not just looking at it in single points of time.
That's helpful. So you mentioned something interesting about, the future needs in the market and what the trends are out there. How are you getting a feel for that? I mean, is it talking to your recruiters just based on what they're hearing from candidates? How are you getting that feel from the market? I'm curious for Ashley and Rachel too, what that means for you guys.
Do you want me to jump back in there? Happy to.
I'm sure you have an answer. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of things, right? It's some of the industry reporting, it's webinars like this, it's going out and being resourceful and finding that research on your own. To your point, talking to recruiters is really, really important. I haven't been in a recruiting role in some time, but it is really important to continue those conversations, specifically with the compensation team too, right? Looking at your offer accept rates, looking at your pass-through ratios, and understanding where the dropout points are, and drilling into why is it happening, reviewing your rejection reasons, and trying to get a good sense of where the market is shifting and being able to react to those in real time.
Yeah. Ashley, I know you do a really great job of like the offer acceptance tracking, and you're very, very, very strong in that area. I'm curious to go to our next question here, which is related. How do you determine the right level of granularity when you're analyzing data like offer acceptance, like this recruiter feedback? Like, how do you choose how specific, how granular to be?
I think you have to start by just like defining the question you're trying to answer, because data can be a black hole. There's so much out there. And if you're just pulling data and trying to like glean insight without understanding how you're trying to direct it or hone it, it can be really overwhelming. And so you have to figure out what is the question you're trying to answer, what's the problem you're trying to solve, and then define what are those metrics that you need to pull in order to get to an answer. And like don't overcomplicate it. Don't try to slice and dice it too many ways up front. Like pick your one or two slices that you want to get to. Like around initial capacity planning, it's like, all right, well, let's look at historical data and what's one or two ways we want to slice this to understand how many hires somebody can make in a quarter. And for us, it started with like your function and the location that you're in. And then once you get a sense for that data and you feel really confident in it, okay, cool. Now let's look at it by level, or now let's break it down by cost center. Now let's understand like the complexity of this sales cost center versus this one. But you have to start somewhere and figure out what you're trying to define. And so to Jeff's point and to the question around like what level of granularity around like sign-on bonuses, that's a specific question we're trying to answer in like, all right, what trends are changing in the industry? Those are two great data inputs if you're trying to understand changes that are happening. Are we losing more offers? Let's look into why. That means maybe the market is getting more competitive, or maybe it means our compensation is no longer aligned to the market. But you have to start by understanding what's the question you're trying to answer. Otherwise, you're going to pull a bunch of data. You're going to try and figure out maybe what it says, when in reality, if you had defined that problem up front, you would have gone to the right data source up front.
I really like that. Yeah. Back to the problem. It's often like when you're lost in the weeds, like you're stuck in the forest, you're like, I'm surrounded by trees, but none of them are telling me what I want to know. I really like that. So to transition to our second category here, which is external influences, right? We've been really stuck in the first few questions in what we can control, right? We know this data, we see it really clearly, we live in it all day long, we're obsessed with it, it's hanging over our bed at night. But now we have external influences. So I'd love to kick it to Rachel to talk about AI, right? Everyone's talking about it, it's everywhere, we're obsessed with it. It is, of course, already affecting recruiting. So I'm curious, Rachel, how are you leveraging AI? How are you changing your capacity planning based on this leveraging of AI? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, definitely. Obsessed, yes, is the word. Everything, can't get enough, following everyone. If you reach out to me afterward, I'll give you my top non-work uses for it. They involve wine. But we're really embracing it, and I'm thankful to work for a company where we're thinking about like having our enterprise, like internal GPT that we can use. Our team is leveraging like other GPTs that recruiters have used. Just like through ChatGPT. And then of course, like we've got a bunch of tools, like seemingly AI is coming in as features through like every tool that we're using daily. So I work very closely with like our legal team, and I've been very involved in like AI governance, and there's a lot of interesting things happening, and like trying to figure out like what our risk tolerances for things. So I'd say the top ways that we're using AI right now is for like scheduling automation. I manage a team of TA coordinators, and there are just so many manual things that I think are like low-hanging fruit that AI can help with, so that we can kind of like shift their focus of work and like maybe have people focusing on more meaningful activities and interactions. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we've made adjustments to our capacity yet. It's more like with AI coming in and thinking about automating like some of our candidate communication and leveraging automation for like hiring manager recaps and like screening of applications. We've really just started to shift what recruiters are working on daily, and we're hyper focused on like improving our candidate experience and like using their time, again, on more meaningful interactions with like their stakeholders and with candidates, and even on sourcing. Like we're not trying to use AI to replace the time that recruiters spend sourcing. We still want them involved in that very much, in like research and bringing forward trends. So I think it'll be interesting to see as time goes on, like, and we have more data to measure like time saved, what else we might do with that time or how it might impact capacity, but it's kind of where we're at today.
Yeah. I especially like your focus on not replacing people on your team, right? The goal is not to replace all sourcers and RCs with this nebulous tool and we lose all joy and hope. But I like that it's about delivering a better candidate experience, right? Because sourcing is so much more than just finding a profile, sending an email. It's about building relationships and networking for the long term, and getting a positive brand experience for FanDuel with the effort of these folks. And if AI helps you to find them faster, like that's all the better for the relationship. You mentioned something also about like legal and governance, and this is a really big thing as more and more companies are trying to adopt AI, where the legal minds at B are very wary of this. So it sounds like you've successfully kind of won this case internally. What's your advice to folks who might be trying to do something at their company of getting the buy-in at the executive legal level to do this?
Yeah, to be clear, no battles have been won, if any legal folks are watching. But no, they've been really great partners. And I think we're like still figuring it out, right? Like regulations are evolving, and we want to make sure that we're going about things in the right way. Like there's something in New York specifically around like automated like decision tools. And we're not trying to like have AI select the people that we hire. So we very much still have our recruiters involved. So I think it's just, having a transparent conversation and not being like against legal, like look to legal and compliance and risk folks and AI experts as like your partners, because I think that I've learned a lot from them. They've probably learned a lot from me, in just talking regularly about like what it is we're trying to accomplish. And then I think if you are working for maybe a larger organization where it might take a little bit longer to get approval for AI tools, think about places in your process that are maybe a little bit less risky, like scheduling, or like, something that might help replace some of the manual tasks, like end of week hiring manager recaps can be really time consuming. We've automated that process, and that's saved some time to be able to shift to other things.
That's awesome. And I'm sure your hiring manager is obsessed with you now that you have this process in place. That sounds awesome. So going to our next question about external influences that we can't control. Ashley, I'd love to hear from you about this concept of market expansion, right? We are going to a new geo, whatever it may be, and we need to hire people there. Maybe we've never done it before. It's a whole beast of a problem, right? How do we forecast if we don't know what we're going to do? So I'd just love to hear about how you capacity plan for market expansion, what metrics you're looking at, what tools you're using, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I really liked what Jeff said earlier about it being, a science and an art, especially when you're expanding somewhere that there's so much you just don't know. And so I think you have to kind of identify when you're entering into a new market, like a new geo. All right, what is it that we do know? What is it that there is data that we can pull? What is it that we can learn from research that exists out there or tools that exist? And then what are these things that are just unknown that might derail us? I think that some tools that we use that are really helpful, we have like LinkedIn Market Insights, which can be helpful for us understanding what is the eligible candidate pool look like here. And then we lean really heavily on our legal partners doing research with external counsel around things like, all right, well, what are notice periods going to look like? Even what are some cultural norms around how and when candidates might take calls? Like an example is we launched into Luxembourg last year, and there's just a ton of regulatory hoops that we had to jump through just to get our entity like stood up. We had to get offers out before we technically had an entity, and then of course it took a really long time for us to like finally get everything in place. We had to send an offer letter that got a wet ink signature. We couldn't do a digital signature. So like there were a lot of these layers of things that we just didn't know what to expect. So those are the things that you just don't know and you can't account for until you run into them. So in those cases where there are a lot of unknown, I still think it's important to set a goal. It's don't be afraid to actually like set a goal, set some metrics that you are striving toward, but just be really clear and over communicative about, all right, these are the inputs we are assuming, and this is what will get us to that goal. And then as things change, constantly communicate like, all right, well, we missed this regulatory filing. This is changing. Oh, candidates aren't actually responding to this messaging, or they only take calls during this time and we don't have good overlap in our time zones with our recruiters. That was a challenge we ran into. And so that's going to put us back in this place and we have to re-strategize. But I think as long as you are being really communicative, it's okay that those metrics shift. Everybody's learning together when you're standing up something so new and expanding into a new market. But I think the pitfall is if you're not communicating, it looks like you're not doing a good job versus, hey, look at everything I am trying to make this work.
I really like that. How is it going, by the way? How's Luxembourg?
Well, so far we were able to hire, I think, 4 people last year. We have a couple more headcount set up, still sending like real packets and needing wet ink signatures. But so yeah, we'll make it work.
Good, always. I'm curious, because you said about communication and a lot of communication and feedback, especially in something new, is about creating safety for your recruiters to be like, this is not working. I am against a wall. I can't do anything. How do you culturally create that sense of like, we're in this together, we're going to be able to figure this out for something like this to be successful, to foster that communication?
I think it's so important to treat it like a project more than just like a standard recruiting experience. And that includes like a project kickoff. Who is your project team? What are everybody's roles? What are expectations? What do regular check-ins and data updates look like? That really like builds that sense of communication and community around getting this goal met. And then everybody's brought along every step of the way.
I love that. The team journey. Thank you. That's an awesome answer. So going to our third bucket here, this is about building and adjusting, right? So we've built the plan, we've considered the external things that are going to affect our plan. Now we have to do the thing. And then a lot of stuff is going to happen concurrently with us executing, and we're going to have to pivot, right? Or else we're not going to be successful. So we touched on this briefly, but Rachel, I want to hear from you in more detail about incorporating attrition into your plan, especially if it's attrition that's outside of what you may have forecasted. If there's some sort of market trend, you get more exits than you're expecting. I'm just curious how you're managing this today and working with it.
Yeah, of course. This is not like a perfect plan. There's no magic here, but It's a huge part of our plan here. I think, for FanDuel specifically, like we've just come out of a period of hyper growth. Our attrition is not high. It's actually quite low, but it does account for more hires per year now than our new ads. So we have to rely on historical data. So when I'm putting together a forecast, I'm looking at like, okay, well, what if it's extremely high? What does this mean for how many recruiters we need to fill so many roles, almost like a sensitivity chart analysis. Ashley, I'm envisioning that chart you mentioned. It's probably not as impressive, but we're looking at all different scenarios. And then we're also, planning for periods during the year where we know we're going to hire more. And we're like, okay, well, what if during this period of time everyone leaves? Like, worst case scenario, how are we going to plan? Like, what's our option B and our plan C? If that goes south. So I think just giving yourself options and kind of knowing where you stand. Should you start to notice things are shifting.
And when you say giving yourself options, are you, I guess, building in kind of, I guess, slush capacity for your recruiting team? Like if we're going into the holiday season, right, where we know people might be transitioning, taking new jobs for Jan 1, are you just giving recruiters more capacity? Are you kind of over hiring for your team almost? Or I guess, how exactly are you doing those corrections?
Yeah, our team is very agile, and I don't know if this is the case for other people, but our finance team reforecasts quarterly. So every quarter we're getting kind of an updated hiring plan. Things move quickly, like we're all kind of figuring out like regulations around sports betting together, and we don't always know like when the timing will be if we're going to enter a new state. Like we might have an idea, but then we might need to move very quickly to hire people to support. So we've done a lot of work to like cross-train our recruiters, and like that's kind of just the nature of our team. Like we once had people dedicated to certain roles, and now we just have to be agile because that's what we've got to do. But in kind of that like plan B, it's like, okay, we can't expect to have this quality and like have recruiters focus on all of these human interactions and like stakeholder and candidate experience and plus stretch them like beyond max capacity. So sometimes that plan might require like bringing in some contractors very quickly or like finding other support. And like, I think just, working really closely, communication, again, like Ashley mentioned, with like your finance partners and your HRBPs and like all of that knowledge that they might pick up in conversations that you're not in is extremely helpful. And then just like making sure that you're aligned with finance ahead of time. Like, okay, we've got to go pull that lever. We're already aligned on how much it might cost and like timing and everything allows us to be really agile.
That's very, very helpful. Jeff, I missed you. It's been a while since I've heard from you. So this one's for you. I'd love to hear about more data from you, obviously, around how you're incorporating time to fill, time to hire, notice period, like these really concrete, measurable timelines. How are you building that into your strategy of how long you have to kind of back out of these hire dates?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think time to fill is sort of that term that everybody just throws around, and I think it's defined very differently at different organizations, right? And I think really to start, it's important that you define it and align on it with your key stakeholders, because the reality is it's not just from the time that you open a job till when that person accepts. It's a lot of different things for a lot of different people, and in just generic time to fill is not going to account for all the moving parts that impact total hiring timeline. So to create what I think we're looking for here is ultimately a more predictable and more proactive recruiting strategy. It's important to consider those additional timeline metrics that actually do influence hiring speed and do impact recruiter workload and in some cases the candidate experience. So I think you touched on it, starting with approval time. I think approval time can mean different things to different organizations depending on where they're at in terms of their maturity of a headcount request process. But ultimately, it's the way I define it or have historically defined it is from the time that a manager requests a role to the time that it's approved by all the necessary stakeholders involved to say, go ahead and recruit. I think tracking average approval time by department or role type highlights bottlenecks and could ultimately improve hiring efficiencies if you do find issues there. I think faster approvals ultimately lead to more predictable hiring cycles. If the business knows that approvals take 2 weeks on average then that should be factored into your hiring forecast. And how you get there is really setting SLAs for approvals to manage stakeholder expectations. I think the next piece after that, I know I've talked a lot about or in past conversations about kind of how do you measure job prep and kickoff time, because that's obviously important. It's sort of that time between an approval and actually being in the weeds of recruitment that can be hard to measure. And I think the reality is that it's not going to be perfect. Some recruiters are more proactive than others on setting up intake meetings while the approval process is happening, or pre-sourcing when they know a role is coming. I've always had a hard time with it because it's not always the most measurable. A lot of ATSs don't have somewhere that you can plug in a date. The way I've always thought about it historically is actually to look at it from time to identify. So from the time the job is opened to looking historically at, on average, how long does it take for your hired candidate to hit that pipeline? I think it's easier to track job prep. It's easier to track than job prep and kickoff time, because most ATS platforms are going to be able to tell you when a candidate first hit your pipeline. And I still think it accomplishes what you're looking for when tracking or trying to track job prep and kickoff time, because it's going to highlight inefficiencies in intakes and sourcing, right? Longer time to identify is going to indicate unclear role requirements or weak intake sessions or sourcing challenges. It's also going to reveal to you what parts of the business are really well structured, right? A shorter time to identify is going to suggest that the role is either repeatable or the team has done a really good job of defining it well. And again, that longer time to identify is going to signal some misalignment and complexity there. I think the latter half of that piece is sort of your time to hire, right? From when the candidate enters your pipeline to when they accept an offer. It's going to give you your view of hiring efficiencies. It's going to help you identify which teams have extended hiring processes that may need improvement. You can layer in pass-through rates to determine if longer interview stages are ultimately causing candidate attrition. And I think that is typically what's looked at or talked about as your time to fill. But what you mentioned earlier is you also have to worry about that notice period, or you have to be cognizant of that notice period after an accept, right? So from the time a candidate accepts to start date, that's going to be influenced by a lot of different things, right? I have no idea what the notice period is in Luxembourg. I don't have to right now, so I'm not going to worry about it. But like, it's really important that in a recruiting ops, people ops role, you're aware of what your average notice periods are, whether it's influenced by location-specific resignation periods, non-competes, reloads, all that stuff. Being able to track that is going to allow you to set realistic expectations on start dates with the business and your finance partners and your business partners, everybody involved. So it's going to help you adjust your hiring forecast to be much more scientific than just really hoping for the best.
Yeah, I really like what you said about the concept of like an SLA, right? And it almost gives me this feeling that you're distributing responsibility, because historically hiring it's talent's fault, and when it goes well, talent, gets a pat on the back. When it goes wrong, talent gets yelled at. And it's cool to hear you say, right, we have agreements with people who are working with us, and this is what you can expect. I'm curious though, when you see those trends start to break down, like to use your example, when you see a role that isn't necessarily getting a lot of traction, the JD might be wrong, the ideal candidate profile might be, misaligned. How are you delivering that feedback? How are you creating joint accountability with the hiring managers in a way that's productive and good for everyone?
I think I've seen it happen a few different ways in the past. And I'm not sure which one's perfect, to be honest, but I think it's really important to have internal guidelines on here's how it should work, right? Having even SLAs in the prep kickoff, right? Of, hey, a kickoff should happen within 48 hours of approval, or having structured intake templates that ensures all the key details are captured up front. Because the reality is some jobs may not need it. Some high volume sales jobs may not need kickoff meetings. Recruiters can just go and run with it, where some of those harder to fill roles are going to require that more extensive pre-work. I know Talent Insights was mentioned before. That's something that we always encourage recruiters to leverage as part of those intake meetings, whether it's about a specific profile or a hard to fill role, to kind of bring some of that data up front to say, hey, this might be hard to fill because of this data that LinkedIn is ultimately telling us, right? And so even just expectation setting up front may change the conversation of the intake meeting and could lead to better alignment 60 days, 90 days into the role.
That's very helpful. So we've talked about these external factors, things we can't control. So now let's jump into the ultimate thing that we can't control, which is the executive team, right? The powers that be, and we love our execs, obviously, I'm making fun, but they do hold the keys, right? They are the ones who are ultimately making these high-level business decisions. And talent operations, especially in this increasingly automated AI-driven world, is becoming a more expensive, a more scientific discipline. And for certain execs, it can be seen as, unusual. Like, why do we need to expend these resources? Why does talent need this crazy $30,000 tool? So Ashley, I want to go back to you for a moment and hear, how are you presenting and tailoring your business case about talent resources to executive audiences, particularly different types of execs, right? Your finance, the CEO. Just tell me more about that interaction.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always coming back to like, what do they care about? Like, who is my audience and what do they care about? Finance tends to care about cost. If I'm going to our engineering leaders about a new process or tool, they usually want to see the data and understand, like, the data implications of it. Some leaders are going to care more about time saved or the quality of available talent or the brand impact. So I think it helps to just take a step back and identify who is the stakeholder, what's important to them. And if you're not sure, if you haven't partnered with them, like, ask around. You ask them directly, ask their EAs, ask recruiters who have worked with them. Like, it's you want to just build that part first. And then from there, you sort of build that case with some of those data points around, all right, if we implement this process, it will impact brand awareness by this much, or it will impact our time saved by this much, or we will save X money. And so usually you're able to pull some of that data from, like, oh, here's our current process or how our current tool works compared to how we are assuming that this one will work. And that's how you can make your business case. But if you get too in the weeds on the finance or too in the weeds on the data and they don't care about it, it's not really a compelling case for them. So I think it's also really helpful because not everybody understands the full talent process and what touch points having a tool that can help automate it or add in AI, why it's helpful. So it can also just build credibility for you if you can be that partner that can educate them on, like, all right, this is how we are going to approach it. This is what is standard. This is why this uplevels our team. This is why this uplevels our brand. And that'll help bring them along as well, in addition to the cost savings or whatever those, like, data points will.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because, like you said, I think finance and talent are the classic example of these, seemingly opposing interests, but you really are asking for the same thing. You want this to be efficient and want it to be successful. I'm curious, the CRO, right? The sales leader at the organization, who obviously is like, put gasoline on the fire, hire as many salespeople as we possibly can. I'm curious, what is your advice in navigating that personality who wants more, and you might be the more conservative party?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it comes down to, like, all right, well, what are the company's goals? Like, are we saying we need to hit X amount of revenue? I actually think sales and recruiting is really easy to match up because we have a pretty concrete capacity model. So does sales. If we need to hit this much revenue, how many account executives are you going to need? And how many SDRs are you going to need? And by when? Well, I have this many recruiters that can fill this many seats by that date. Are we going to miss, or are we going to exceed? And if we're going to miss, we need to set that expectation up front. Is finance and the CRO on board? Or is the CRO now in your pocket to help advocate for additional headcount for your talent team that you need to either go get a part-time or a full-time resource? So actually, I think the sales and recruiting models match very nicely.
Yeah, I like that. Get an extra, ace in the hole, right, to help push your thing across the line. Jeff, this is our last, I guess, formal question. But I want to hear, what are the resources, or I guess the data points you need to use to present to an executive audience if you're trying to get external resources, right? You have done the capacity planning, you have your existing team doesn't have the capacity to do it and execute on their business initiatives. So how do you make the case to get external resources? And is the case different if you're asking for agency versus a more plugged in RPO?
I think regardless of what it is, what's important, or what to me has always been the most important, is framing external recruiting as a strategic lever and not just a reactionary fix, right? It should be used to optimize hiring capacity, accelerate key hires, support business growth when internal resources alone aren't enough. And I think in an ideal world, how you can sort of challenge that idea of it being reactionary is that it's created and socializing that framework up front. So when the need arises, it's less about presenting the business case. But obviously, in an ideal world, that's always not going to. It just isn't realistic. I think a few data points for me that are really important here is looking at capacity and demand, really making sure that you're demonstrating the need, right? Before you're requesting external support, show where internal capacity falls short. And I think that's using a forecasted versus actual hiring capacity model to highlight that gap, right? And then a little bit further, understanding what the impact of unfilled roles are. If hiring delays are going to affect revenue or product launches or operational efficiency, well, the cost of waiting may outweigh the cost of external resources. And that kind of leads us into that cost benefit analysis, which is really tricky. But I think if you can get there, it tells a really great story, because ultimately what leadership is likely to want is a financial justification. And it should be, external recruiting should be positioned as an investment and not just a cost, right? So comparing internal versus external costs, what's it going to cost to go hire another in-house recruiter or two, or what's the cost of engaging external firms? Also, going back to my earlier point, factoring in lost productivity, right? If an open role has an impact on revenue, show how faster hiring could offset those external costs. So an example that I've used in the past is if sales hiring delays cost $100,000 per month in lost revenue, and an external recruiter costs $20,000 per hire, well, the investment actually may end up paying for itself. And so I think that's really important. And then going back to my earlier point about defining it, I think what's really helpful if you do have it well defined up front is sort of laying out your scenarios for when you'd leverage external recruiting. So is it hiring surges so you can scale really quickly? Is it market expansion into Luxembourg? Is it confidential searches where sort of that stealth hiring is required? Or is it really more that short-term support? And I think all in all, I think the key takeaways is really positioning external recruiting as a strategic hiring accelerator, using data to back up your decisions, and then show how external recruiting resources can help scale hiring capacity while maintaining that financial efficiency.
Yeah. That's very, very, very helpful. And I would be remiss to say, as a Unicorn Talent fan, there actually is a free spreadsheet. We'll send it after this call that is a capacity and demand forecast. You can put in your talent inputs and it can actually spit out and tell you, right, do you need to start thinking about these external resources? But as our last question here, because we're 15 minutes left here, as Natalie said, please drop some questions in the chat. But while you guys are doing that, I'd love to just go around the room. We've talked so much about strategy and process. I'd love to hear about tools, like geek out. Tell me, like, what are the tools that you like? What are you using? What's helpful? As much as you're willing to share, we'd love to hear. Rachel, I'd love to start with you. How are you actually doing this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and perfect time to plug Jem, because I think I saw Lee, one of my favorite people here on the call. But we recently had the privilege of working with Lee to implement Jem for our team, and people are loving it so far. And then also, shameless plug, my team is now leveraging their scheduling tool, so highly recommend. Other than that, we're pretty lean. Like, we use Greenhouse and LinkedIn Recruiter, and sometimes we get creative and are going stealth mode, but would love to hear what everyone else is using too.
Cool. Jeff, what about you?
I think it's a fun question. So the basic tech stack, Greenhouse, we do use Looker for a BI tool, right, to have some of that real-time dashboarding. I think it's taken us a long time to get to the point where we are. It was a lot of spreadsheets. I don't think you can just throw your data into a BI tool until you know that it's right. You know what I mean? It's accurate. So spending a lot of time in spreadsheets and cleaning up processes and putting guardrails in place so that good data is going in, so that you're going to get good data going out. I will also shamelessly plug that we are a newer Headcount 365 customer. So a lot of the concepts that we've talked about today, I have been very excited to really lean into Headcount, because it's sort of the next iteration for us in our headcount management processes.
Oh,
Can I go back
thanks,
for a
Jeff.
second and also say that we use Headcount 365? Great, Tyler.
This is not sponsorship. Uh, thanks, guys. Ashley, what about you? Last but not least.
Yeah, I'd also +1 on Gem. We've been using them since 2020. And I just really like how accessible their reporting is. Like any one of my recruiters can jump in and build their reports and their dashboarding and be able to answer these questions and bring them to their stakeholders to have these really like concrete strategic conversations. I think having it accessible is a huge win. And then we use Modern Loop for scheduling. And we have actually done some of the like efficiency analysis, and we have needed to hire less RCs because so much more of our scheduling is automatable, which was able to like justify leveraging the tool, which was great. So I think that one's also really, really been a big help.
Nice. Yeah, Modern Loop and retweet on Jim. Jim is also a big, it's a great tool. All right. Thank you, guys. Natalie, I'll kick it back to you for some Q&A.
Wonderful. There's no questions thus far, but one thing I will mention is we do have Talent Collective has partnerships with Gem, Modern Loop, and Pending Greenhouse. So we do have exclusive discounts and incentives. So if you're interested, just ping me and I can get you in touch with the right people. But yes, the amazing Lee Miller is here. She's one of our favorite people as well. So yeah, just want to throw that out there because who doesn't want the best deal in town, right? So let's see, we do have one question from Melissa. Jeff, you mentioned not throwing your data into a BI tool unless you know it's in a decent shape. Did the same apply when deciding to implement Headcount 365?
Thank you, Natalie. Yes. So short answer is yes. I think my team, I think Tyler, maybe Scott and Eric for that matter, know how, I guess for lack of a better term, I am about being crazy with reconciliations, right? Like I have been in a place for a long time where I've learned that being reconciled with finances is going to build credibility and trust, not only with just that team, but across the business, right? With business leaders and business partners. So different conversations don't have different outputs of what these expectations are. So yes, I really put a lot of value into that reconciliation, and getting that to a good place was a big hurdle to get over, and a really great hurdle to get over, to being comfortable with moving into a tool like Headcount, where I knew we were reconciled, I trusted the data, and we were ready to put it in a more sophisticated tool.
Amazing, thank you. Melissa, if you had, okay, she said thank you. No follow-up questions there. Next one is from Veronica. Can you perhaps, I don't know if this is directed at Jeff, so I'll just pose it to the group, but share thoughts on how to ensure diversity in hiring of all kinds, despite broader changes in the market, corporate directives, etc. I think that meant, can you share thoughts on how to ensure diversity is happening in hiring, despite market conditions and changes?
I can share some thoughts on this. I think diversity policies and initiatives are changing in the broader market, but it's always been true that, your organization usually either has a top-down philosophy or a bottoms-up philosophy. And as changes in this top-down and like kind of corporate-driven philosophy are changing and maybe becoming less public, it doesn't change that you can still work from bottoms up pretty effectively. Now, that means you need to agree with your talent team on what it looks like to help make sure your jobs and postings are available to a diverse audience, and that your process is set up in a way that is equitable for diverse audiences. And luckily, there's a lot of tools that can help you measure some of that. Like Gem, for example, you can look and see, all right, how diverse is my pipeline? Is the diversity at the front of my pipeline similar all the way through, or are diverse candidates falling out in our process for some reason? And so that bottoms up mentality, I think, can always be true. And you can really drive that specifically from the recruiting team. I don't have an answer for the tops down one. I think there's so much changing in the market and politically right now around it that I'm interested to see where it lands.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we're in good shape. Thank you to our amazing speakers, moderators, our co-hosts at Unicorn Talent. Thanks for partnering with us on this. This was very insightful, to the point. Love it. We will, oop, man down. Hold on. Here we go. Lost my little guy. We will send a follow-up email and also have the link to the recording. It'll also be on our YouTube channel. So if you want to reference back anything, but be on the lookout for the email. Otherwise, everybody gets some time back in their day. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.